Hey there, and welcome back. My name is Phil. You are watching the Phil Rosenberg Show, and I am here with Jaffe, a guy who has been on the cutting edge of art in the modern world for several decades. He opened in the 90s one of the most well-known New York art, I want to say art house, but I guess it's a gallery, but the thing is that it encompasses a way of being and thinking. So, Jeff, thank you so much for being here with me today. We're going to talk about some really interesting stuff. Thank you. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure to be with you, Phil.
Yeah, my pleasure, and truly my pleasure. So I want to first address a couple of things. So not all of our listeners are necessarily going to be familiar with pop art or urban art, right? So let's just give a really quick for the lay person and, for me as well. What is pop art as opposed to other arts, and what is also urban art, and is there a connection between those two things? If so, what is that?
That's a really great question because it's fundamentally what we do here at Pop. Pop art is an art movement that actually most people don't believe or know started in the UK in the late 50s. But it tended to have a much broader appeal, and for really good reason in the US, given the commercial nature of life and business and whatnot in the US. So it gave rise and birth to people like Andy Warhol, who arguably is the father of pop art. And it's art that pop art is really referring to the nature of what popular culture is, pop culture. And Andy Warhol was one of those artists who derived images and art from popular culture and advertising and commercials and that kind of thing. He was obviously most famous for his Camel soup can and images of Marilyn Monroe. And he was quite political as well. In the early part of his career, he was doing things about the race riots in the South. And he was pretty on top of what was going on in the world.
So there's an interesting point to make there, Jeff, because when people think about pop music, right, which is music designed for the sort of, just to say, the middle, as it were, right? It's not necessarily connected to protest, activism, and political thought. That's something that's a little bit different about art, isn't it? About pop art. It seems to me most of the pop artists that I've had the pleasure of viewing have found some way or something that there's a rebellion against something. I feel like, there's a comment about something in society that's political, that is related to activism. And so would you say that is that a trend in pop art generally, or is it just something that I happen to, maybe I place that interpretation there and it comes from me? I'm not sure.
So look, the nature of art is that one can interpret what one wants. However, pop art isn't necessarily a political movement by any means. It was really something that derived from things that had to do with politics, that had to do with commercialism, that had to do with advertising. If you think about the 60s when Warhol and Lichtenstein and those big names were sort of coming up, this country was flooded with advertising and television and marketing and signage and all of that. And so Andy Warhol in particular was one of those artists who imbibed that and began to use it in a way that became political. So a portrait of Mao Zedong, for example, would have been a really interesting portrait, given that Mao Zedong was the antithesis of everything commercial and money and so on and so forth.
Got it. Yeah.
But the irony.
But then you take a step, and then you look at urban art, right? And just a lot of people think, when they think about urban art, a lot of people think graffiti is one of the main forms.
Right.
And at its core, at the moment graffiti takes place, it is a rebellion, right? It's a breaking of the rules, right?
Correct.
So it's immediately, there's no other way. I don't even think it's really open to interpretation. So there's something. Then you're saying that pop and urban art are not connected in that way?
No, I think you misunderstood me really a little bit. What I was trying to say is that the early pop art movement technically wasn't really political per se, although one could sort of derive some political understanding of it. Urban art and graffiti art, as we know it today, as it's become perhaps one of the the most important leading recognized art movements in the world today is indeed something that is derived from popular culture.
Got it.
For sure.
Yeah.
But in its infancy, defacing buildings and spray painting on gates in front of storefronts and doing that kind of thing was rebellious. It was a rebellion in a certain way. I wouldn't call it politically riotous, but it was something that really was rebelling against culture to some degree. And then as it evolved, it began to take a different sort of scant, if you will, of the worldview. And that was political. It also reflected popular culture in some way, and has now sort of become defined in any number of ways that could be certainly tied to the history of pop art, but it has become its own movement in its own way. And my gallery is interested in the word pop, obviously, because it has to do with pop art, but it also has to do with popular culture. Mm-hmm. And so photography could be derived from popular culture. Famous sports, famous actors and actresses, famous figures in general who could have been photographed fall into the idea of what popular culture is. And so the Pop Gallery is a perfect venue to be able to show and host artworks that have to do with pop art, pop culture, and art or photography, for example, that is derived from popular culture.
Got it. So anyway, you've been open for decades, and you've been really at the forefront of pop art and also urban art. And you've had people come, you've really exposed a lot of folks that would never have understood or thought about either pop art or urban art, right? A lot of times people's first exposure are through the artists that you represent. And there's something to be said for that. And also that there's a huge change happening right now. So we're in the world of a pandemic, right? So art galleries are not accessible in the brick and mortar sense, right? I can't come down to the Bowery and Spring Street and check out your gallery right now, as much as I would love to. So I have to go online, right? So I want to know, how has the pandemic affected your business, but the world of art and your brick and mortar? Get into that and talk to me also about hope for artists, or is there no hope for artists who are worried about what the pandemic means for art in general, right? Where the money will come from to buy art, to support artists. People are really worried about that. Can you speak to those issues for a minute?
Sure. Look, the pandemic has changed everything for everybody in innumerable ways, in ways that are yet even to be unraveled. We're not fully aware of what the full impact of this COVID-19 is going to have and has had on popular culture, on business, on whatever it is that we do. In the art world, it's had a profound effect, in certainly the gallery world, in that brick and mortar businesses are indeed shut down. We're under lockdown. We technically are not allowed to open to the public at this point. I can be in my gallery to do certain things here and there, but we are not allowed to be open to the public. So consequently, this pandemic, which, as I say, has had a profound effect on immeasurable businesses, has had a profound effect on the art world. As a consequence of which, we have had to adapt. And one of the ways we adapt, of course, is something that in the great flu from all those many decades ago, centuries ago, whatever, they didn't have social media. They didn't have the internet. They didn't have access to Zoom. They didn't have the kind of technology that we are blessed with in some ways. It's a blessing and a curse, I suppose, to some degree. But we have to adapt. Artists are going to make art regardless. Over this period of 3 or so months that the gallery's been shut down, I've been in touch with the artists that we deal with and represent, and they're working. they're either somewhere in a shed or their studio where it's safe to work, and they're still working because art is not something that you can just put away. If you're an artist, it's part of who you are and what you are, and so artists will continue to work. My responsibility, though, as a dealer, is to sort of now take that the context has changed, and so we have the internet and online methodology to be able to still represent artists in a proper way.
So let me ask you a question. So can you sell a piece of art for the same price online as you do in the actual gallery itself, or do you have to make some kind of adjustments?
No, we're selling art pretty much for the same price of what we do regularly in the gallery. Most of our collectors know who we are and what we are. We're actually, through this pandemic and the digital world, we're acquiring new collectors. Artists are surprised that we're calling them and saying, hey, I've got this, I'm dealing right now with a fellow in India who saw something online and is asking all the questions and has made a wire transfer to get the art shipped to India this morning, which is just wonderful. So it's a way that.
Let me ask you this. I just wanted to go right to this. What is the most expensive piece of art that you have ever sold?
Oh,
and how much? How much was that?
Well, we sell hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of art, up to millions. I mean, we've sold major pieces of art. Now, we'll say this: art that is heavily priced, major collectible artwork, for the most part, and historically in the last, I'd say, 10 years, is generally not bought physically. People buy it because it's an investment. People buy it, and all they want to do is make sure that it's in good condition. So they'll send an agent out to view it or do that kind of thing.
But you don't know how much the most. I mean, for our listeners, for our viewers, you don't know how much the most expensive, or roughly how much what the most, $20 million, $100 million.
Well, look, the auction houses exist as a way to deal with it. Actually, auction houses are online, and I think one of the first most expensive painting ever sold online auction was $56 million. So people will spend that kind of money online knowing what it is that they're buying, which is it's a significantly different setup than somebody who's interested in a $3,000 or $4,000 piece of art at an art gallery, where we're used to people wanting to come in and look and touch and smell and look at the frame and all the stuff that sort of makes the experience of buying a piece of art rich and fun. But we're also now coming to realize that people will buy art, given that they either trust the art dealer, the gallery with whom they're working, and that the artist to some degree has a good reputation or has been around for a while.
Got it. So let's talk now about Feeding America. It's a really important initiative. When I give you the floor, tell me about it. There's a lot of curiosity surrounding it, so go ahead.
So what we decided to, given this pandemic, and obviously the material effect that it's had on us, the business is shut down. We have to think out of the box. People are giving up their lives and on a daily basis, both from the pandemic itself and frontline workers and homelessness and hunger, and all of that stuff has sort of increased exponentially as a result of this. I have a niece who's a nurse in the ICU at NYU. I have a niece who works for the New York Department of Health who got the virus. So there are any number of ways that we had to start thinking about how we could continue to do business and at the same time have a good effect on helping, really. And
how's it affect the community that you're in? You are, I mean, you're not living in the world by yourself, right?
We do not live in a bubble. We are not isolated, correct. And historically, this gallery has always been tied to community events, and trying to do things. We've been affiliated with, numerous charities and whatnot over the years. We either donate space or profits or that kind of thing. So we decided that Feeding America is, from what my team here had sort of done when we were thinking about doing this, was to investigate which organizations, charitable organizations, were really meaningful ones that did incredible work. And Feeding America came up as one because the amount of the dollar spent against the dollar raised is just phenomenal with them. They spend virtually nothing other than the money that they earn and raise on their mission, just to feed hungry people. And so we chose Feed America as a means to contribute and be part of something that was larger. So we decided to have this event where we're going to donate a portion of the proceeds directly to Feeding America from people who buy art online.
That's great. That was really a way to give back, or if not back, just give to the community. It can be very difficult, I think, when we're all living in an isolation of a kind or another. Some very isolated, others, if you're lucky, perhaps you have an immediate family surrounding you, so you're not completely isolated. But it's important, I think, to make connections to the wider community. And any way that you can do that, I think, such as the way that you're talking about, you're able to take a percentage of your business, the proceeds, and put that in a place that's going to help a lot of other people. That must be really satisfying and setting a great example, might I add, for other businesses that have, shall we call it, a privilege to be able to do the same. You know?
Yeah, I take that as a huge compliment, but I also want to add that the artists that we're representing chose to be a part of this as well. So when I say the gross proceeds, 20% of the gross proceeds, which is a huge chunk of sale, is coming out before the artist gets paid, before the gallery gets paid, before the commissions, salespeople are paid. Sure. So it's pretty huge. So I have to thank the artists that are participating in this from the bottom of my heart as well. This has been, we could not have done this without them and their desire to participate.
So let's talk now to, you've been in the business for, I don't mean to call you a dinosaur if I say you've been in the business.
I'm an old fart, don't worry.
For a long time. But let's address, there are a lot of young people that are looking at the world of art, not necessarily sometimes as an artist, but sometimes as a collector, wanting to understand the business side of the art world. So I want to ask you to give a little bit of advice to a new collector, a budding collector. If you had to give a couple of, say a couple of things to someone who's on that path, who wants to be in the shoes in which you're standing right now today, what do you say to them?
So this is actually perhaps one of my favorite questions that I get asked on a fairly regular basis. And it has to do essentially with my worldview and my view of art and art collecting, and B, the fundamental philosophy of this gallery, what we do and how we approach young collectors. I always, and my staff, the team that works here selling art for the gallery, has absolutely embraced this philosophy that if somebody says to us, what's this piece of art going to be worth, in 5 years? Oh, I don't know. It's not an Andy Warhol that, is worth $200,000 or $300,000 that we know over a period of time is going to, increase in value and so on and so forth. It's something that you love. And as a consequence of that, we will say to you, if you love it and you can afford it, and you're buying from somebody who's reputable, buy it. So if you're a young collector and just starting out, we have programs where you could buy a piece of art over 12 months, interest-free, and you get the artwork immediately. So you're not crushed if you're a young collector starting out with not a whole heck of money, but you'd like to start a collection.
What about the idea, what do you think, this strategy where as a young collector, maybe you go out there and you try to find a young artist who doesn't have a name yet, but who, when you look at their artwork, you feel it really strongly. And so it's not too expensive usually to become involved with a brand new artist. And you're, what do you think about that? We're just trying to grab young artists up like that and support them. And, with the idea that maybe 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, you'll have something of real value. Maybe
so this,
20 years. Yeah.
Again, that's a great question. There's no way to really know what a young artist is going to develop into and how collectible they're going to become. Or there's no way to predict that. If you came to me and you said, Jeff, I've got a couple $1,000,000. Could you help me in a portfolio? Because that's an investment. Although, that's a monetary fiscal investment. If you came to me and said, I want to invest in the idea of collecting, that's another kind of investment. It's in oneself. The very first art that I bought, I still have from 35 or 40 years ago. And I'll tell you a quick funny story if you don't mind. I tell it often enough. My daughter was home from college one weekend, and I came down the hallway in the apartment, and she and her brother were sitting and having breakfast. And so she said, well, okay, I heard her. She goes to her brother, she says, okay then, so if you're gonna get this one over here, then the two around the corner by the couch, I think that would be a fair balance. I should get those two and then you can get this one. And I was like, guys, what are you doing? You're like trying to kill me off here? They high-fived each other and said, gotcha. But the beauty of that wasn't so much the joke that they were pulling on their dad. It was that I had art in my house that I bought really a long time ago that I just loved. And my children have grown up with it, and it's been a part of their experience. And as a consequence of which they do value. They don't see it in the monetary sense of being valuable, but in the sense of it being part of their family life.
I understand just what you mean. So when I'm going to ask you to predict the future a little bit now, this is a little more difficult because, of course, the future is always unknown. But as regards the world of art, particularly, let's talk about pop art. Post-pandemic, what do you see? We don't even know really. I know what date. We can't even guess what date post-pandemic or what it'll look like. But what do you see? You have a lot of experience in the world of art. What does tomorrow hold?
So I genuinely, from the depths of my soul, believe that the art world will continue. Artists will continue to make art. The gallery model may shift to some degree. I think eventually we'll settle down and galleries will be back up and running. Some won't, some will. The model, as I say, may change to some degree. I think there'll be a lot more online involvement. Tonight, for example, with this Feeding America Collect for Cause event on our Instagram account, we're actually interviewing two of the artists that are being featured. It's a live interview. So that kind of thing is genuinely helpful and fun and enticing for collectors. And I believe it's a very genuine, meaningful purpose. Pop art is always going to be around. It's one of the most important art movements of the 20th century. If you look at all the art movements that have sustained themselves prior to that, Picasso is always going to be Picasso, and Van Gogh is always going to be Van Gogh. So Andy Warhol and Roy Lichtenstein and in more recent times, Keith Haring and Jean-Michel Basquiat are all going to be around. There's no question about that. We represent some of those artists here at the Pop Gallery, but at the same time, we've got a stable of younger artists that are coming up, some of whom I've been representing from the day we opened 25 years ago, and some who've been with the gallery for 10 years. So for me, that's a very important sort of feature of what the art world represents to me. Longevity.
So you predict good things for the world of art post-pandemic. Let me ask you so you're in Soho, right? Is it Soho, Bowery and Spring Soho?
Bowery and Spring Street, yeah.
Yeah. So, but for those that don't know, if you're not located in New York, Chelsea is often seen as the place where all the galleries are just snuggled up, all one up against the other, and we're seeing, or are you? Let me make it a question. Are those galleries able to maintain their businesses? Are they closing? Are they on the cusp? Do you know what's happening?
Well, yeah, it's a great question. Look, I mean, Chelsea became Chelsea because the rents in Soho got so crazy. And so people moved to Chelsea and it sort of became the new hub. Chelsea at this point is also now one of those situations where the rent is just getting crazy, and a lot of galleries have shifted out of that area and opened up in other areas. I decided the Bowery, of all places, when we had been in our space for nearly 20 years, on West Broadway, we decided to move to the Bowery and find a more affordable space at the time, because rents were getting out of control. But I think that landlords are going to have a shift in mentality in general, I think, in the retail world.
When you say landlords are going to have a shift, you mean they're going to have to come down on the rents, I assume?
Yeah, I think that's part of the argument, and part of the
or maybe
logic.
Forgive some past due. Right?
Well, look, in terms of the pandemic, yes, I think that lots of landlords are being very flexible and helpful, and that's one thing. But I thought you were sort of asking me more on a long-term basis.
Well, both. No, I think both questions I'm asking. I mean to ask both, but
so I think that long-term there will be some businesses that will not open or won't survive. Who knows? But in the short term, given this pandemic, which has been just an earth-shattering, earth-changing, mind-blowing experience for so many retail businesses, bricks and mortar businesses, this is a moment of sort of stepping back and sort of evaluating and reevaluating. And one can't do that without the help of landlords and so on.
Sure. And that's really the theme of all of these interviews that I've been doing lately, is evaluating, reevaluating, reinventing yourself, understanding how the business world is changing around you as we speak, and being willing to be flexible enough to be the reed that bends but does not break. That, I think, is the trick. And so I want to thank you very much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure. Let me just give you an opportunity, though, to plug whatever you want to plug. Tell me what's happening in your world. How can people see you, connect to you, view your art, attend your events?
Thanks. I appreciate that a lot. Well, of course, you can always find us at www.popinternational.com. When you click onto that website, there's a big button that says Collect for Cause, which is this online event. Certainly feel free to check us out on that level, and maybe perhaps buy something and be participatory in helping to donate some money to Feeding America. Our Instagram account is @popgallery. Tonight, as I say, there will be 2 live interviews with some of the artists that we represent. Phone lines are still working, 212-533-4262. Emails are working. You can find us really all this information on our website. And all right. I thank you for the opportunity.
My pleasure, Jeff. Thank you very much. Folks, this has been the Phil Rosenberg Show. I am, of course, Phil Rosenberg. I want to thank you, Jaffe, for joining me today. And check out the world of art. Hope is not lost. Hope springs eternal. You can do it online right now until we're back into the world of brick and mortar. Have a great day, folks, and enjoy your weekend. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.